ancestors are speaking to us.
But the shell is broken. This is not right.
The village of Namaru lay quietly in a wide green valley, hugged by soft hills and tall trees that moved like slow waves in the wind. At the village's heart rested a lake, so clear it held the sky like a perfect mirror. People said the lake was ancient, older than the first farming fields, older than the oldest story. But what truly made Namaru special was not the lake itself. It was what lived beneath the water's shining surface. The villagers believed that a great tortoise spirit, Kumu, slept at the bottom of the lake, watching over them. They said his shell was as large as a meeting house and as bright as the stars above. When the moonlight touched the water just right, shapes of tiny glowing dots shimmered across the surface, patterns that looked like constellations. The elders taught that these were reflections of Kirimu's shell, a sign that he was still there, still guarding them. At the edge of the lake stood a shrine made of smooth river stones. Inside it, sheltered from sun and wind, lay a single piece of Kirimu's shell, massive, curved, and cool to the touch. Its surface changed colors gently, like a thin layer of sky painted on stone. Every villager, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, treated the shell with deep respect. Some bowed as they walked by. Others whispered quiet thanks for the peace and safety it brought. For generations, Namaru had relied on that peace. No floods, no storms, no sudden sickness. The fields stayed green, the children grew strong, and families lived without fear. The villagers believed their good fortune came from one simple truth. As long as the shell remained untouched, Namaru would prosper. But even in calm places, shadows sometimes gather. And in Namaru, an old worry lingered beneath every smile. It was rare to hear it spoken aloud, but the elders never forgot it. When the evening fires burned low and children gathered close, the elders' voices would drop to a soft, serious tone. Their faces would tighten, as if remembering something too painful to speak of clearly. Listen well, they told the children. The shell is not only a gift, it is a warning. Then, with a deep breath, they whispered the words passed down for centuries, words that clung to the air like a chill. To harm the shell is to unravel the world. And though most children shivered only a little, a few felt the warning settle deep inside them, like a stone sinking into dark water. Lemery was known across Namaru long before he understood why. People often said his name with a mix of hope and disappointment, like they were waiting for something inside him to finally shine. He was 14, tall for his age, with quick hands and restless eyes. Some days, he felt like he carried a storm in his chest, always moving, always pushing him toward things he didn't fully think through. He lived with his mother in a small mud brick home near the lake. The walls were lined with old baskets, dried herbs, and tools that once belonged to his father. Lemery could barely remember the man, but the village remembered him well. His father had been one of the guardians of the lake, people who watched over the sacred shell and kept the waters clean. They said he was brave, calm, and wise. They said he showed respect, even in silence. Lemery wasn't like that. Or at least, that's what everyone reminded him. Every morning, when he walked through the village paths, people looked at him as if expecting him to carry on his father's greatness. Some offered soft smiles, but others simply frowned, shaking their heads when they thought he wasn't looking. He heard the whispers behind him, how he was too impulsive, too stubborn, too wild, how he would never match his father's footsteps. Those words stuck to him like burrs. Lemery tried to ignore them, but deep down they made him angry. He didn't want to be compared to a man he barely knew. He didn't want to be told who he should become. And he especially didn't want to hear the old stories about Kirimu and the sacred shell every time he made a mistake. One afternoon, while helping carry baskets from the fields, he dropped one. It wasn't even a hard fall, just a simple slip, but the older boys nearby burst into laughter. "Careful, Lemery," one of them mocked. "What if Kirimu saw that? Maybe the shell will crack just watching you." Another snickered, adding, "Maybe that's why the spirits don't trust him." Lemery clenched his teeth, pretending not to hear. But the heat rising in his chest told the truth. He hated how easily they picked at him. He hated how powerless he felt. At home, his mother tried to comfort him, but her gentle voice sometimes made him feel worse. She kept talking about responsibility, honoring traditions, and learning patience. She reminded him that the village depended on people who respected the lake. "You are your father's son," she said often, "and that means something." But to Lemery, those words felt like a heavy stone tied around his neck. Instead of pride, they brought pressure. Instead of hope, they brought fear of failing again. What hurt him most was that he didn't even believe the stories about the shell the way others did. To him, they sounded like old warnings meant to scare children. He had visited the shrine many times, staring at the smooth, shining curve of the tortoise shell. It looked beautiful, yes, like a piece of the night sky carved into stone, but he couldn't believe it held real power. How could a single shell protect an entire village? How could something so still hold back storms and sickness? It didn't make sense. The more Lemery questioned it, the more frustrated he became. And the more frustrated he became, the more he felt the village turning its back on him. Sometimes he sat beside the lake at dusk, watching the sky fade into orange and purple. He wondered what his life would be like if he didn't live under the shadow of a legend or the shadow of a father he could never match. He wanted to prove something, not just to the villagers, but to himself. He wanted to show that he wasn't weak or foolish, that he didn't need a mystical story to guide him. But he didn't know how. As days passed, the pressure built like steam trapped under a tight lid. Every mistake, every whisper, every comparison pushed him closer to something reckless. Something he didn't yet understand, but felt rushing toward him all the same. Lemery didn't know it yet, but the weight he carried would soon collide with a choice that would change everything, not just for him, but for all of Namuru. A choice that would begin on a night filled with wind, shadows, and a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the world. A night he would never forget. The night it happened began like any other, but Lemery felt different inside, as if the world had shifted slightly out of place. He and his mother had argued again. She had scolded him for skipping his chores, for letting his temper get the best of him, for acting like he didn't care about the village or himself. Her words, though meant to guide him, cut deeper than she realized. "You must learn to respect the lake," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Your father did. That's why the village trusted him." Lemery tried to stay calm, but the storm inside him rose too fast. "I'm not him," he shouted before he even realized it. "And I never will be." The silence that followed was sharp and painful. His mother turned away, her eyes glistening, and Lemery felt something collapse inside his chest. Instead of apologizing, he stormed out the door, letting the cool night air swallow him whole. The village was quiet, its small homes glowing softly with lantern light. He walked past them with quick, angry steps, needing space, needing air, needing something he couldn't name. His feet carried him toward the lake, the one place where he felt both angry and calm at the same time. A thin fog drifted over the water, moving like pale fingers reaching across the surface. The moon hung low and full, its light reflecting in long silver lines. The trees shivered in the wind, creating soft whispers that felt almost alive. Lemery sank down onto a patch of grass near the shore, hugging his knees. He tried to slow his breathing, try to push away the hurt. But the anger stayed. So did the feeling that no one understood him, not even his mother. As he stared at the lake, his eyes settled on the shrine where the sacred shell rested. Even from a distance, he could see the faint glow it always had at night, like tiny stars trapped inside stone. "Everyone trusts the shell more than they trust me," he muttered bitterly. The wind picked up, carrying cold air that rippled across the lake. Lemery shivered but didn't move. Something about the night felt strange, heavier than usual, like the world was holding its breath. Then he heard it, a low hum, soft, trembling, rising and falling like a heartbeat buried deep in the earth. Lemery froze, his eyes widening as the sound grew a little louder. It was coming from the direction of the shrine. He stood and walked toward it slowly, each step filled with a nervous curiosity. The hum wasn't loud, but it felt powerful, as if it were vibrating inside his bones. By the time he reached the shrine, the sound had changed. It had become sharper, almost like a warning. But Lemery didn't hear it that way. Not tonight. Not with his heart full of hurt and pride. He felt as if the shell was calling him out, challenging him, like the whole village did. Like the world expected him to be someone he wasn't. Anger flared again. "You don't control anything," he whispered harshly. "You're just a shell, just a story." His hands were shaking, though he wasn't sure if it was fear or fury. He looked around, searching the ground until he found a rock, smooth, round, small enough to hold but heavy enough to feel powerful in his palm. He closed his fist around it. Another hum rolled through the air, deeper this time. Lemery's heart pounded. His thoughts blurred into a single, reckless burst. Just one throw. One strike. One moment to show he wasn't afraid. "Let's see how real you are," he said. Before he could stop himself, before he could hear the part of him begging him to wait, his arm swung forward. The rock slammed into the shell. A sound ripped through the night, sharp and unnatural, like ice cracking across a frozen lake. It echoed through the valley, bouncing off the hills, rolling across the water. Lemery stumbled back, eyes wide with horror. A thin line appeared across the shell's surface. A crack. The glow around it flickered and dimmed. The hum stopped. The lake went still, so still that even the wind seemed afraid to move. Lemery's breath came fast and shaky. His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. The anger vanished instantly, swallowed by a rising wave of fear. "What did I do?" he whispered, his voice trembling. He reached out a hand, but pulled it back before touching the crack. The shell looked wounded, silent, fading. The world around him felt colder than before. He stepped away, then turned and ran, his feet pounding the earth as if running could erase what he had done. But the crack stayed, and its echo still hung in the air, waiting for dawn. Dawn crept over Namaru slowly, painting the sky in soft orange and pale gold. But the beauty of the morning didn't match the weight that hung over the village. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, long before anyone understood why. Lemery barely slept after the forbidden night. He had stumbled into his home long after midnight, his hands cold, his breath uneven. His mother had been waiting for him, fear sharpening her voice as she scolded him for disappearing. He tried to answer her, but the words stuck in his throat. All he could do was nod and sink onto his mat, trembling as the image of the cracked shell replayed again and again in his mind. As the sun rose, Lemery forced himself outside. Maybe what he saw wasn't real. Maybe the crack had been a trick of the light, or a shadow, or his imagination running wild. But when he stepped into the morning air, the entire village was already gathering. People stood in small, frightened groups, their eyes scanning the fields and the lake. Whispered voices drifted through the air like nervous birds. "The crops, look at the crops." Lemery's stomach tightened. He followed the sound until he reached the fields and stopped in shock. The green stalks that had stood tall the day before were now drooping, their leaves yellowed as if they'd aged overnight. Some had collapsed completely, with no sign of pests or disease. They looked drained, lifeless. Nearby, cattle refused to approach the water troughs. They shook their heads, backed away, and let out uneasy noises. Even the goats, usually loud and stubborn, were silent. A group of children ran past him, their faces pale. "Something's wrong with the lake," one cried. Lemery's heart lurched. He hurried after them, pushing through the crowd that gathered along the shore. What he saw stole his breath. Fish, dozens of them, floated belly up near the water's edge. The lake, always clear and calm, looked cloudy, tinged with a faint gray that shouldn't have been there. Ripples moved strangely, as if the water were uneasy, as if it were shivering. Fear settled in the air, thick and heavy. Then someone shouted from near the shrine. "The shell! Look at the sacred shell!" Lemery froze. His blood turned cold. A wave of dread washed over him so fast he could barely breathe. He knew what they were about to find. He knew the crack would be there, waiting. But he forced himself to walk forward, blending into the crowd, so no one would see how hard his hand was shaking. The villagers gathered around the shrine, their faces twisting with horror. Across the curved, shimmering surface of Kirimu's shell, the crack was clear, thin but deep, cutting through the glowing patterns like a wound. The light inside the shell was dimmer than ever before. It looked tired, fading, broken. Gasps spread across the group. How could this happen? Who touched it? This is a sign, a terrible sign. The elders pushed through the crowd, their expressions grim. Elder Madora knelt beside the shell, touching the cracked edge with trembling fingers. It has been harmed, he said softly, his voice heavy with grief. The balance is broken. A panic rippled through the villagers. Mothers held their children closer. Men exchanged worried looks. Some dropped to their knees, whispering prayers. Lemery wanted to speak. He wanted to tell them the truth. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His throat closed, sealed by fear, guilt, and the image of what might happen if he confessed. What if they hated him? What if they cast him out? What if he destroyed everything? His mother stepped beside him. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at his pale face and trembling hands. Lemery, she whispered, is there something you need to tell me? He shook his head quickly, too quickly. No, he muttered. I don't know what happened. But the words felt like stones in his mouth. As the villagers exchanged fearful theories and the elders tried to calm the rising panic, Lemery felt himself shrinking inside, like a shadow pulling away from the sun. He had cracked the shell. He had started all of this. And though no one else knew, the truth clung to him like a weight he could no longer carry. The first consequences had arrived, and deeper ones were still coming. The village of Namuru felt different by the next morning, quieter, heavier, and filled with tension that lingered like a storm waiting to break. No one walked with ease anymore. Every step felt rushed or hesitant, every glance sharp with suspicion. Bad news had spread fast. The crops were failing. The lake seemed sick. The sacred tortoise shell was cracked. The elders had assured everyone they were searching for answers, but the villagers needed someone to blame. Fear makes people hungry for a target, and now that hunger was growing. The first whisper floated through the market like drifting smoke. Someone must have broken the shell. Then another. It couldn't crack on its own. Someone did this. And another. The spirits punish us because of one person's selfish act. Lemery heard every word, even if they weren't aimed at him. Yet, each whisper felt like a needle against his skin. He tried to help his mother prepare cassava roots at their small stall, but his hands shook too much. Every time someone looked his way, his heart jumped. Each passing villager sounded like they might say his name. His mother finally sighed and pulled him aside. Lemery, you're pale. Are you sick? She asked softly. He shook his head, but the truth pushed against his chest. How could he tell her without seeing disappointment in her eyes? A mother's pride was a fragile thing, and Lemery feared breaking it just as he had broken the sacred shell. That afternoon, the elders called a village gathering. The entire community circled around the speaking platform. Children clung to their parents. Farmers stood with dirt still on their hands. Even the fishermen, usually loud and cheerful, sat in stiff silence. Elder Madora stepped forward. His face looked older than the day before, as if the crack in the shell had carved new lines into his skin. We are in danger, he began. The balance between us and the water spirit has been disturbed. The land weakens. The waters darken. Something has happened to the shell, something intentional. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lemery's heart thudded painfully. We believe, the elder continued, that the shell was touched when it should not have been. The whispers started immediately. Who would dare? It must be someone careless. A child, maybe? A jealous person? The chief stepped forward next. The person responsible must come forward now. Hiding the truth will only bring greater harm to us all. Lemery's breath caught. His body froze. He opened his mouth, but fear pulled him back into silence. The weight of dozens of eyes, the shame, the anger, the disappointment, it was too much. He felt like a lone leaf caught in a storm. The chief waited, but no one spoke. Finally, he said, "Very well. If the guilty one will not confess, we will search for answers ourselves." The crowd broke into uneasy murmurs, louder than before. Suspicion slithered through them like a serpent. People began scanning the faces around them, trying to decide who looked nervous, who looked guilty, who might carry a secret. By evening, the whispers had turned harsh. A fisherman shouted that he saw strange footprints near the shrine. A mother claimed she'd heard movement late at night. Two boys argued about who looked suspicious. Lemery kept his head down, walking home with tight shoulders, feeling as though the whole village were looking at him, even if they weren't. Not yet. When he reached his house, he found Elder Madora waiting outside his door. The elder turned slowly, his gaze thoughtful and heavy. "Lemery," he said, "may I speak with you?" Lemery's knees almost buckled. His mother stepped out behind him, surprised. "Elder, is something wrong?" she asked. Matora's eyes stayed on Lemery. "I just want to ask him a question." Lemery swallowed. His breath felt trapped. "Where were you the night before the shell cracked?" The word struck him like a blow. His mother stared at him, confused. Lemery's mouth opened, and the truth trembled on the edge of his tongue. But fear won again. I was asleep," he lied softly, "at home." Matora's eyes narrowed, searching his face. Lemery forced himself not to flinch. After a long moment, the elder nodded slowly. "Very well. Thank you." He walked away, but Lemery didn't feel relief. Only dread, because now the elders were looking, the villagers were watching, and the truth, his terrible, fragile truth, was burning a hole inside his heart. The third day after the shell cracked arrived with a heavy, breathless stillness. Not even the birds sang. It felt as though the entire world were holding its breath, waiting. Lemery woke before dawn, startled by a strange rumbling that trembled through the floor of his family's hut. At first, he thought it was thunder, but when he stepped outside, the sky was clear, the horizon glowing faintly with the first hint of morning light. Another rumble rolled through the earth. This time, the ground beneath him shivered. Lemery stumbled, grabbing the side of the doorway. A few houses down, a woman yelped as a clay pot toppled from a table and shattered. Dogs barked wildly. Goats bleated as though sensing something unseen. The villagers poured out of their homes in confusion. What's happening? Is it an earthquake? Is this another sign? The trembling stopped, but the fear didn't. People stood frozen, looking at one another with wide, uncertain eyes. The elders rushed toward the shrine, their robes flying behind them. Lemery's heart hammered. He followed the crowd at a distance, each step heavier than the last. When they reached the shrine, they found the sacred shells glow pulsing weakly, like a lantern running out of oil. Elder Nira knelt beside it and whispered, "The spirit is restless." But Elder Matora's face had already turned toward the forest. "Look," he murmured. A thin veil of mist rose from the treetops. Not the gentle morning mist they knew, but a darker, swirling haze that spiraled upward as if stirred by something alive. A chill swept through the crowd. Then, far in the distance, came the first scream. A young hunter burst out of the trees, breathless, terrified, his spear clenched in a shaking hand. "The forest," he cried. "The creatures, something's wrong with them." He collapsed in front of the elders, gasping as he tried to speak. The deer, the birds, they're fleeing. All of them, running in the same direction. In the deeper forests, darkness is spreading through the ground like rot. The villagers stared at him in horror. Nature had always been balanced around Namaru. Animals moved with the seasons, the winds carried predictable rain, and the forest spirits were gentle and quiet. But now the rules were breaking one by one. Someone whispered, "This is because of the shell." Everyone fell silent. Lemery felt the words like a knife. He wrapped his arms around his chest, as if he could hold himself together. Suddenly, another rumbling wave shook the village. The ground split near the edge of the lake, forming a jagged crack. Water surged upward, splashing over the shore, as if something beneath the surface were pushing back. The lake churned violently, not like wind-tossed waves, but like something living beneath it was moving. A deep, hollow moan echoed across the water. Children screamed and clung to their parents. The chief shouted for everyone to step back. Elder Matora leaned close to the lake's edge, his face pale. The spirit, it suffers. It is trapped and wounded. The balance is breaking apart faster than we feared. The villagers cried out in confusion and terror. How do we fix this? What does the spirit want? Will the village survive? Matora stood slowly, his voice trembling. We need the truth. Without it, we cannot heal the shell or the spirit. And then his gaze swept across the crowd. He didn't call Lemery's name. He didn't have to. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, long enough for Lemery to know the elder suspected him more than ever. The villagers began arguing, fear turning quickly into anger. Someone must come forward. How long will we suffer? Who did this? Lemery stepped back, then further back, until he stood alone at the very edge of the gathering. The water moaned again. The forest shivered. The sky dimmed though the sun was rising. The world was unraveling, and Lemery knew this was only the beginning. The disasters didn't stop, they grew. By the next morning, the once clear lake had turned a deeper, murkier gray. The air carried a faint sour smell, and a strange film coated the water's surface. The forest continued to moan and shift, as though something inside it was twisting with pain. Even the sky felt wrong, clouding over without rain, heavy without relief. But worse than all of that were the eyes. Everywhere Lemery went, he felt them, watching, calculating, guessing. He walked through the market trying to help his mother collect supplies, but each time he passed someone, whispered words followed like shadows. Look how quiet he is, children lie. That's what they do. He was always wandering, always near the shrine. Lemery's mother snapped at a group of gossips, trying to defend him. My son did nothing wrong. Leave him alone. But even she sounded unsure now. Lemery could hear it in the tightness of her voice, the slight tremble of doubt. He didn't blame her. He blamed himself. Every step he took seemed to echo with the memory of the crack spreading across the shell. Every sound of nature breaking, every rumble, every splash, every rustle, felt like the spirit calling out his name. By midday, the chief announced another village meeting. People gathered near the shrine once more, but this time there was less fear and more anger. Tension buzzed like insects. Elder Matora stood in front of the cracked shell, its dim glow flickering weakly behind him. The balance worsens, he said, voice low but steady. The spirit's strength is failing. We can no longer deny that this is the result of human wrongdoing. A murmur spread through the crowd, an angry, restless noise. Matora continued, we must find the one who touched the shell. If the truth stays hidden, the suffering will only grow. The spirit will not forgive lies. A fisherman stepped forward, face red. Then searched the homes. The shell didn't break itself. Another woman shouted, someone must confess. Before the ground splits again, a heavy, sharp silence fell. Lemery felt his heart slam against his ribs. A part of him wanted to confess, to scream the truth, to throw himself at the elder's feet and beg forgiveness. But his legs wouldn't move. His voice wouldn't rise. Fear held him like cold iron chains. Fear of being hated, fear of being cast out, fear of being the reason the village suffered. He couldn't face it. Not yet. The elders began questioning specific villagers. Where were you that night? Did you see anything unusual? Did anyone wander near the shrine? Lemery remained at the edge of the crowd, shrinking further into the background. He hoped no one would point at him. But then old Mara, the sharp-eyed herbalist, lifted a bony finger. That boy, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The quiet one. He looks guilty. Dozens of eyes snapped toward Lemery. His stomach dropped. He felt small, exposed, fragile. I did not see him home that night, Mara continued. His mother looked worried. Ask him. Ask the boy. Lemery's mother stammered. He was home. Was he? Mara challenged. Lemery stepped back. The crowd stepped forward. Elder Matora raised a hand for silence. His gaze locked on Lemery. Gentle, searching, full of an understanding that hurt more than anger ever could. Lemery, he said quietly, you must speak honestly. For the village, for the spirit, for yourself. Lemery felt heat rise in his throat, behind his eyes. Everyone was waiting. The truth pressed harder and harder, like a weight he could no longer hold. He opened his mouth, but the forest roared before he could speak. A deep, violent sound shook the ground. Birds exploded out of the treetops, screeching. The villagers screamed and scattered as cracks spread across the ground, reaching toward the shrine. The shell's glow flickered wildly, then dimmed to almost nothing. Elder Nira cried out, "The spirit is dying." Panic took over. People ran. Children cried. Elders shouted for order. The lake churned violently, sending waves crashing onto the shore. And Lemery stood frozen in the chaos, the truth burning inside him like fire. Nature wasn't going to wait for his courage. If he didn't speak soon, the whole village would pay the price. The tremors slowly faded, but the fear they left behind clung to the village like damp smoke. People hurried back to their homes. Some cried. Others argued. A few simply stared at the lake in shock, as if waiting for the next disaster to strike. But Elder Matora didn't leave. He stood by the shrine, one hand resting gently on the cracked shell. His eyes were distant, filled with sadness and a kind of tired wisdom that made Lemery's chest tighten. Lemery approached him slowly, almost dragging his feet. The noise of the village felt far away now. Only the sound of the wind and his own heartbeat filled his ears. "I need to tell you something," Lemery whispered. Matora looked at him calmly, as if he had been waiting. "Yes," he said softly. "You do." The words came out shaky at first, but once Lemery began, he couldn't stop. He told Matora everything, sneaking out the anger, the stone, the crack that had echoed across the valley. He confessed how he'd hidden it out of fear, how guilt had followed him every step since. When he finished, he felt empty, like the confession had scraped out every secret inside him. He expected Matora to shout, to curse him, to tell the villagers and let them decide his fate. But instead, the elder closed his eyes and sighed, a deep, weary sound filled with disappointment, but not hatred. "Walk with me," Matora said. They left the shrine and began making their way toward the forest path. The sky above them felt heavier than before, as if even the clouds were listening. After a long silence, Matora finally spoke. "Lemery, the spirit did not weaken because of your mistake alone," he said. "You struck the shell, yes, but the crack only formed because the village itself was already breaking." Lemery frowned. "I don't understand." Matora touched the trunk of a withered tree as they passed. "The spirit reflects us, our unity, our harmony. For many years, people have grown jealous, angry, divided. They hide their bitterness like you hid your guilt. And just like you, the village hoped nothing would come of it." Lemery swallowed hard. Hearing the elder speak felt like another crack opening in his heart. So the shell broke because everyone was falling apart inside. "Yes," Matora said. "Your strike was only the final push." They walked deeper into the forest until they reached a narrow path leading into the hills. The air here was cooler, quieter. The ground was covered with fallen leaves that whispered beneath their feet. Matora stopped at the foot of the path. "The Cavern of Echoes lies beyond the ridge," he said. "Long ago, the Guardians would go there to face the spirit and seek truth. If you truly wish to atone, you must take this journey." Lemery felt his throat tighten. "Alone, yes, only you can walk it. But understand, atonement is not about punishment. It is about facing the parts of yourself you've run from." Lemery stared at the winding path. It looked dark, cold, and endless. But he had already seen what happened when he chose the easy way. When he lied, when he hid. He couldn't do that again. He stepped onto the path. The elder nodded once, proud but saddened, and turned back toward the village. As Lemery continued into the forest, the shadows seemed to shift around him. The wind carried faint whispers, like memories rising to the surface. Every step felt heavier, but also more determined. For the first time, he wasn't running away from the truth. He was walking toward it. When Lemery returned from the Cavern of Echoes, the village could hardly recognize him. His face was still young, still marked with worry, but there was a new steadiness in his eyes, like someone who had finally stopped hiding from himself. In his hands, He carried the sacred minerals the spirit had revealed to him deep within the cavern. They shimmered faintly, their surfaces glowing with soft colors that shifted like breathing light. These minerals were pieces of the earth's memory, Matora had said, materials strong enough to bond with the shell if the village's hearts were willing. But even with this hope, the air in Namaru felt tight. Storm clouds still hovered above, thick and low. The wind continued to whip dust across the village paths. Some homes had been damaged by the earlier winds. Others still showed scorch marks from strange lightning strikes. Fear had not disappeared, and neither had doubt. As Lemery crossed the village square, people turned to stare. A few stepped closer, studying the minerals in his hands. Others backed away, wary or resentful. Elder Matora raised his voice. "Gather, all of you. The time has come. The spirit watches us. We stand either at the edge of rebirth or the edge of ruin." Slowly, the villagers formed a circle around the shrine. Lemery stood at the center, staring at the cracked shell. Seeing it again sent a wave of guilt through him, but this time he didn't look away. He knelt, placing the minerals gently along the largest seam. Matora spoke to the crowd. "These minerals alone cannot repair the damage. The shell cracked because our community cracked. To mend it, each of us must offer a truth, a burden, a pain, a confession we have hidden. Only honesty can heal what dishonesty broke." A soft, uneasy groan rose from the people. Truth was a frightening thing. Matora lifted his staff. "Step forward if you are ready." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, surprisingly, the first to step into the circle was old Mara, the same woman who had accused Lemery days earlier. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I resented everyone who passed my shop without helping me in my old age," she said. "I let bitterness fill me, even toward those who try to be kind. Including you, Lemery." She placed a small carved stone, an old family keepsake, beside the minerals. The crack pulsed faintly with light. Next came a fisherman who had argued with his brother for years. Then a mother who admitted she envied another family's success. A young girl confessed she had lied out of jealousy. A man revealed he had been hiding grief for months, too stubborn to ask for comfort. One by one, the villagers stepped forward. With every confession, the shell brightened, as if drinking in their honesty. Even the air felt different, less sharp, less angry. Finally, only Lemery remained. His hands trembled as he touched the shell. "My truth," he whispered, "is that I was afraid. Afraid of failing like I already felt I had. Afraid of becoming nothing. Afraid of disappointing everyone. I hid behind anger, and I hurt all of you because I didn't want to face myself." He pressed his palms against the minerals. Light surged, soft at first, then growing, flowing across the cracks like molten gold. Gasps filled the air as the shell began to glow from within, its patterns reshaping, healing, strengthening. The storm clouds above shivered, then slowly began to break. A warm breeze swept through the village. Matora stepped forward, voice trembling with hope. "It has begun. The spirit hears us." The healing had started, not just in the shell, but in the hearts of Namaru. The glow from the shell spread outward like a rising dawn. It washed over the shrine, over the stones, over the villagers who stood frozen in awe. For the first time in many days, warmth returned to the air. Not the dry heat of fear, but a gentle, living warmth that felt like comfort. The lake responded first. Its dark surface began to shimmer, the murky gray fading into clear blue. Ripples formed, soft and steady, as if the water itself was breathing again. The strange smell lifted, carried away by a clean wind sweeping down from the hills. Then the skies changed. The thick clouds that had haunted the village began to peel apart. Light poured through the gaps, thin at first, then brighter, until the entire sky opened into a deep, peaceful blue. The storms that once felt angry now melted into nothing. And then it happened. A shape rose from the water, made of pure light, soft gold and pale blue. It took the form of the great guardian tortoise, Karimu. Its shell glowed with living constellations, just as the legends had always said. It didn't speak. It didn't roar. It simply watched the village with calm, ancient eyes. For a quiet moment, everything was still. Then the spirit lowered its head toward Lemery, not in anger, not in warning, but in acknowledgement. Acceptance, as if to say, "You have learned. You have grown." Before anyone could take a full breath, the spirit slowly dissolved back into the water, leaving behind a warm shimmer that spread across the lake. The curse lifted completely. Crops straightened in the fields. The forest stopped trembling. Sick villagers felt strength return to their limbs. People cried, some with relief, some with joy, some with a mix of both. But no one called Lemery a hero. They didn't cheer for him or raise him on their shoulders. Instead, they walked to him quietly, one by one, placing hands on his back, his arms, his shoulders, not praising him, but welcoming him, accepting him, not because he was perfect, but because he was one of them, a boy who stumbled, a boy who learned, a boy who rose again, this time with others beside him. Namuru was whole once more. Days passed, and peace slowly settled over Namuru like a soft blanket. The storms that once tore at the village were now only memories whispered about at night. The lake, once dark and troubled, shone with a calm brilliance, reflecting the sky like polished glass. At the center of it all rested the guardian tortoise's shell, restored but not perfect. A single seam ran across it, thin yet unmistakable. It glimmered faintly, not as a scar of shame, but as a mark of survival, a reminder of what had been lost, and what had been repaired through honesty and unity. The villagers came often to look at it. Children bent close, tracing the glowing seam with curious fingers. Adults stood in silence, seeing their own struggles reflected in the repaired crack. No one took the shell for granted again. It had become more than a sacred object. It was a symbol of who they truly were. Lemery stood before it every morning, not as a prisoner of guilt, not as the boy who broke it, but as someone who had grown through the breaking. Elder Madora approached him one morning, leaning on his staff. The old man smiled, a gentle, tired smile that carried both pride and relief. "It is time," Matoris said. Lemery didn't need to ask what he meant. He had been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. He knelt beside the shell, touched the glowing seam, and felt a calm strength rise inside him. From that day forward, Lemery became a guardian. Not because of his father's legacy, not because the village demanded it, but because he had earned a right through truth, courage, and change. Children gathered around him often, eager for stories. And Lemery always ended with the same warning, spoken softly so the weight of it settled in their hearts. Cracks teach us where the light enters, but only if we face them together. The lake rippled gently, the sky remained clear, and Namuru moved into a new chapter, one built not on perfection, but on unity, forgiveness, and the strength to rise after falling. A quiet, lasting peace embraced them all.